Rofhiwa Madzena standing by, and Rofhiwa, ESKOM presented their annual results. Of course, it was a very dire picture. No surprises there, I suppose.
That's right, Sally, and this dire picture that they painted for the 2020 fiscal year is not going to be any better in the 2021 fiscal year. And they're pinning this particularly on COVID-19 and the implications of the lockdown restrictions that had on their operations. But some of the key highlights that the CEO and the CFO spoke about this afternoon were the fact that they made a net loss of just over 20 billion rand. Some of the other challenges that they're still dealing with are municipal debt collections. That's increased by 41%, so they've seen an increase in municipalities not paying their debt. A little bit of a green shoot here. We see that the collections from Soweto have improved. They had collected about 12% in debt from Soweto. This has now increased to 21%. And then another piece of good news, they have got Unit 2 of Kusile, which is ready for commercial usage in terms of contributing to the grid, so that may improve the electricity situation. But let's just listen to CEO ANDRÉ about issues of irregular expenditure and how ESKOM is dealing with that.
So we have a huge legacy of irregular expenditure, as one would imagine after 10 years of state capture and corruption. So we are engaged with National Treasury to seek condemnations for that irregular expenditure, but that really shouldn't be laid at the door of ESKOM as it is today. If you look at our performance in terms of irregular expenditure over the past financial year that we reported on today, the total irregular expenditure amounted to 200 million rand. Now that is still far too much. We would like to bring it down, but compared to where we've come from, we've made significant strides in improving our governance to eliminate irregular expenditure.
So another important thing that we're looking at is the overall performance of the markets, and I've got Martin Smith, a portfolio manager at eNCA Capital, to help me break down some of the big news of the week. Martin, let's maybe start with the overall performance of the JSE. From about Wednesday to the end of the week, we saw something that I would call a free fall. I remember Wednesday closing at around 3% in the red because of global catalysts, but maybe just break those down for us. Martin, I just want to ask you about the overall performance of the JSE this week. We saw from Wednesday to the end of the week deep in the red, and I'm sure it's mainly due to some global catalysts. Before we get back to Martin, looks like we're having some technical issues. Let's take a look at how those numbers have ended off the day today. So we're breaking down those numbers that you've just seen on your screen. And Martin, I was just asking about the JSE performance from about Wednesday to the end of the week, deeply in the red. And I assume this is mainly global catalysts that dragged the local bourse.
You're absolutely correct. We saw a sharp sell-off across the board globally and locally. There seemed to be a huge risk-off sentiment trade that came through the market as fears around the COVID resurgence seem to kind of take center stage. We obviously have things in the background like the US elections, but most of it centered around the second wave of COVID coming through quite sharply, specifically across Europe. So we had a massive risk off trade, as well as emerging markets getting sold off quite aggressively.
Right, and then the local unit also suffered. But I wonder, Martin, was this also these catalysts that you've just mentioned, or did the rand suffer from that dismal midterm budget policy statement that the Minister of Finance presented on Wednesday?
It's difficult to tell exactly because obviously they were kind of happening at exactly the same time. The rand obviously sold off a little bit and bonds were down by about 10 basis points. So I think net, in terms of the budget speech that we heard, it was largely expected, albeit mixed. And there were things that maybe people wanted to be a bit more positive, like maybe talk about execution as well as the large wage bill that we currently have at the moment. But again, I think we mostly, for the most part, got caught up in global risk-off sentiment and getting caught in that sell-off.
Right, let's move on to some company news. Steinhoff, an update, Marcus Jooste getting fined a hefty fine for what my colleague Heidi Jokos earlier mentioned, for an SMS that he sent in the build-up to the crash that we saw in 2017. What does this do for the optimism for the share price and shareholders or potential shareholders who might want to get into that stock?
I think we need to look at this more from a justice perspective as opposed to an investment thesis perspective. In terms of whether or not this affects people buying Steinhoff shares, I don't think it actually plays that much of a role. It's more a function of justice and making sure the right kind of course of action is taken from a legal perspective. But in terms of investment thesis, not a particularly huge factor actually at the end of the day.
Right, and then let's quickly speak about Naspers. I saw a little bit of hype around the share buyback with process that's happening. What is the significance of this move by the companies?
So as you would have seen on the kind of being reported, Prosus are buying back $5 billion worth of Naspers and Prosus shares. And the reason that they're doing this is effectively because of the discount that we're seeing these two shares trade at. So they're trying to get some kind of value unlock for their shareholders because of the discount that it's trading at. And I think it's largely positive. It's not massively game-changing, but it is quite a positive move on behalf of the management teams. One thing we do need to caution, it does create a little bit of complexity in terms of cross-holdings between the two companies, but definitely a positive move and a step in the right direction for the company.
And then very briefly, MTN Q3 trading update. What did you make of those numbers that we saw coming out?
Absolutely solid set of numbers, actually a very, very solid set of numbers coming out of MTN. They mentioned the fact that subscriber growth is the highest it's been in any quarter since for the last couple of years. So very positive. Obviously, they're benefiting from a post-COVID world in terms of data and things like that. But just from an execution perspective, management are delivering. If we look at them disposing of things like Jumia as well as other non-core assets in the future, I think there's a lot of potential share upside for the counter. And again, positive set of numbers and one that I'm happy to hold and actually keep buying at these levels.
Right, that's Martin Smith from Anchor Capital giving us a market update and really just wrapping up the markets week that it was. So Sally, in the next bulletin, I'll be telling you whether we'll be getting more load shedding in the medium term, and if we don't, what it is that ESKOM is doing right to prevent that.
Thank you very much, Rofhiwa Madzena from Megawatt Park this afternoon.